Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Idaho House Republicans podcast, where you get to learn about the legislators that you have decided to send to the State House. And today we're going to be speaking with Representative Doug Pickett, and Doug represents Legislative District 27, Seat A, and he has also been elected by the Republican caucus to be the Assistant Majority Leader in the House. Welcome to the Idaho House Republican podcast, Representative Doug Pickett.
Thank you very much, Vic. Appreciate it.
Hey, so let's talk about what does it mean to be the Assistant Majority Leader? What does that mean?
Well, as you know, this is an elected position by members of the caucus. And so collectively as a whole, I think the Assistant Majority Leader has a responsibility to represent that caucus group and try to unify as much as possible, try to be aware of the factions within the party, within the caucus. And I think my role in particular, as it pertains to me, as I see it, is to try to make sure that those polarized or differing or various fractured viewpoints that make up the Big Ten of our caucus feel vested in the outcome, the product.
Right.
Even if they, we're not going to prevail. No one side's going to prevail on any one issue. But if you can walk away thinking that you were heard, you felt like you were able to weigh in, I think that you have a robust confidence that comes out of those processes. So that's my role.
Very good. Yeah. And just kind of creating consensus among the caucus in the priorities of what you want to do.
Correct.
And then how you're going to go about delivering on those priorities. It's a big job. You just were elected to the position. Now, to remind people, Doug, you were the chairman of the Education Committee last year in the House. Yes. And now that you've been elected the Assistant Majority Leader, because you're in leadership now, leaders don't have chair positions, but you are on some committees. So tell people what committees that you serve on.
Yeah, thank you. So my committee assignments didn't change as a result of this leadership change. I still am on the Education Committee, which is one of the 5 privileged committees. That's my morning committee. And then in the afternoons, I have resources and also agriculture. And then in addition to that, I've consistently served on the JLOC committee since my time here. In my first session, I was appointed by the Speaker to serve on the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee.
Perfect.
Which kind of oversees some of the evaluations that we do on government programs in the state.
And you're on Resources and Conservation?
Resources and Conservation.
Ways and Means?
And Ways and Means, correct.
Okay.
That's a new assignment for me with this leadership role.
But as a leader, the leadership generally does not also chair a committee. That's kind of some of the inside baseballs that people should know.
Yeah, that's a precedent. And so because I was elected Assistant Majority Leader, out of necessity, in respect to that precedent, I vacated that position as Chair of Education.
So obviously you're a lot more than just being a legislator. I would tell people a little bit about your background. You were born in Twin Falls, so you're an Idahoan, graduated of Oakley High School, so you love public education, obviously, because you're a part of it. Your BS Economics from BYU, 4th generation owner and partner of Pickett Ranch. Wonder what came up with that name. Oh, I guess I know. You're on the board of the Oakley Valley Water Company, and you are a youth basketball and baseball coach, or were.
Yes.
But most importantly, you are married to a lovely woman named Brady, and you have 3 sons. How long have you been married to Brady?
Been married for 33 years.
Congratulations. Okay, now so let's talk. Your background obviously makes you a very logical person to know a lot about water and agriculture, and so obviously you're on the Agriculture Affairs Committee, which is a perfect place for you.
Yeah.
So let's now talk. Given your work on the Oakley Valley Water Company, can you tell us a little bit about what you worry about in terms of water issues, because it's so critical for the farmers? Talk about where you think we are, what we've done well, and what we need to do.
Very good. Water is the oil of our state, or the gold of our state, I guess you could say. And we trade in water. Our policies all have to be catered around water, because that is in my opinion, the driving force of our economy, and remains so. In our area in particular, for about 40 years, we've been mitigating aquifer and surface water issues, which is uncommon. I mean, most areas are still beginning the process of becoming involved. A lot of areas in Idaho are beginning the process of becoming involved in water mitigation, whereas Southwest Irrigation District, where I'm from, pioneered this back in the 1980s. And so water is critical. It's a balance of surface and water uses, and we don't do anything in our area in southern Idaho without water.
Well, as you know, Lieutenant Governor Scott Bedke is very, very instrumental in the policy here in the state's done a good job of protecting Idaho's interests and making sure that the water that's needed is available. Do you have any medium or long-term concerns about the water supply here in Idaho? And is there anything the legislature can do about it?
Yeah, there is, and there's a lot of on the horizon. There's a lot of concerns and threats regarding misunderstanding of water issues. In my opinion, we do have a good water plan in place. It's all contingent upon having good winters. So this winter is of itself a concern, and we're interested to see how this light snowpack plays out in the 4-year.
We've had abnormally high amount of precipitation, but
Correct.
not a lot of snow.
Yeah. And so I would be interested from a hydrological standpoint, how that's going to affect our spring flows, because we do have tremendous soil moisture all across the watershed, but not the snowpack. But other issues affecting water that we're dealing with is, for example, cloud seeding is one of the most effective ways we can have about stimulating snowpack. It can be targeted. It can be done seasonally when in the winter months, in those particular time frames when we really need to generate precipitation from storms that already exist. But there is tremendous misunderstanding about what that means as far as contrails being confused with cloud seeding and chemtrails and those types of things.
So let's talk a little bit about, let's pivot a little bit and talk about more agricultural specific issues. And I was at an event yesterday. There was some commentary on commodity prices in general with the tariffs and with some of the disruption there has been in the market, and the fact that the American farmer is the most productive farmer in the world. There can be some imbalances in commodity prices. And I believe farmers this year are struggling a bit somewhat in Idaho with commodity prices. What are you hearing from your district? And is that the case? And what can be done, if at all, about that?
Absolutely. The trade policies, the various supply chain issues across the world are affecting commodity prices in the United States. Essentially, all commodities are depressed, with the exception of probably beef. Beef is doing very well.
Right.
But potatoes, sugar beets, grain crops always follow corn and soybeans, and those markets are all depressed. And people are always interested when I tell them that here we are trying to produce 60 pounds of wheat for $5, and 60 pounds of wheat in 1975 sold for $5.
Right. And the dollar has gone down in its purchasing value just a little bit.
Yeah. So it's tremendously difficult in these inflated times and over all those years to produce that crop at the same cost.
And farmers have massive amounts of equipment, and they're expensive. Like combines $1 million now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just incredible amount of investment. Let's talk about another big issue that people talk about and maybe don't understand fully, and maybe you can help us figure that out because you're closer to it, because you actually are in the business. So there's this thing called the H-2A program, and that is basically been put in place where there's an understanding, or just the market bears out the fact that there's not a lot of domestic workers that desire those positions. And so last year, I saw the statistic. There were 400,000 H-2A requests last year, and only 182 of those positions received an application from a domestic worker. So it's 182 divided by 400,000. So talk a little bit about what these H-2A workers are actually, who they are, what their roles are, and why you think there hasn't been a big take-up domestically for these types of jobs.
Very good. One of the results of progression and our economy growing has been tremendous opportunities for people to diversify their work opportunities. And as a result of that, people have moved on in the career cycles and stages and things that they do. There's so many opportunities for people to work that maybe work in a climate-controlled environment, or where they don't have to deal with bugs or pests or dust, grain dust, even just regular dust, whatever, storms. Ag work still is out on the ground, working the soil, working with water, working with plants, doing some manual work, even though there is automation in the industry as much as possible. But there is a tremendous demand for these workers that just can't be supplied by traditional American workers. They just aren't there. And even when they are there, they have other opportunities because of their education and training that these workers that we use don't have in their home countries.
So the other interesting thing that affects, we have a very large dairy industry here in Idaho, and the H-2A program really envisions the seasonal worker. But industries like the dairy, milk is in constant production regardless of the temperature and the season. And those are year-round workers, but there's really no program for those type of workers. So maybe talk about the reality between that full-time foreign worker and the seasonal worker.
Correct. So, yes, it's true because dairy work is consistently year round, 7 days a week. See, it's not seasonal in the terms of like a harvest season or a planting season, or in the livestock industry, a calving season, or whatever you may. Dairy work is consistent, and so therefore it hasn't been classified by the Department of Labor at the U.S. level as seasonal, so they don't qualify because technically visa work is supposed to supply seasonal demand that can't be met by seasonal supply of
Right.
labor, and so that's a tremendous hurdle for them to cross. They can advertise, they can try to hire anybody may come in, but they're not there. They're not filling these positions. And here we have workers who, in their home countries, some of them maybe making $150 a month in their home country, and they're just waiting for an opportunity to come and provide a better life for themselves and their families back in their home countries. And so they can come here seasonally and then return home and bring those benefits home to their families, and they keep coming back. It's not like we're bringing them here and holding them here, like some people would say, but they actually want to be here to provide a better lifestyle for their families back home.
So yesterday, Congressman Simpson was in town discussing this very issue. Apparently, there was some really good work done in this before the Biden administration in terms of trying to close this disparity in the way these workers are treated. But when the border opened and a lot of illegal aliens came into the country, there was just a reticence to even deal with that. Now that the border's closed, Representative Simpson was saying there's maybe a chance that this comes back. And I'd love to get your feeling on there's a bill he's trying to work, which is called the Federal Modernizing America's Workforce Act. Can you tell people a little bit about what that is and why you think it's important that we try to pass that act federally?
Right. Yes, this is something that's critical for our not only for our ag economy, but for our whole economy as a whole, because ag makes up perhaps about 20% of our economy in Idaho. And without these workers, we will flounder. It will be devastating. We could not produce the commodities that fuel the light industry and in the food manufacturing and all of the value added products that come from these commodities that we're doing here in Idaho. And so what Representative Simpson is trying to do is to create a way for them to be held accountable for being here illegally and go get in the back of the line, but get in line so that we can actually legitimize them at some point in time in the future once they've compensated for what they've done for why they're here not correctly or illegally, and then at the same time allow the employers to continue to have the labor that they need to function.
You know, there's another perception that there's really no money to be made if you were one of these workers. We talked about that 182
Yep.
positions are received out of the 400,000 that were
Yep.
needed for that type of work. But there's a misperception a bit about that, right? There's actually the cost of a worker is not de minimis. So
Correct.
maybe talk about all the pieces of that and kind of what's the reality of that?
Right. As an employer, if you're getting a worker who's here on a visa, you're not writing your own rules for their employment. These rules are written by the Department of Labor, which stipulates a wage rate about $25 an hour. It stipulates that you need to provide for transportation for them. It stipulates that you need to have OSHA inspected or Department of Labor inspected housing for them. Everything has to be looked after for them to know that they're here legally, that they're paying their taxes, which they do. They file taxes, that they have withholding. We withhold on them just like
Mhm.
any other employee, and that they have a place that's safe for them to live. And that's all provided for them on top of those hourly wage rates. And so we don't write those rules as employers. So when you get a visa worker, it's transparent, it's above board, and those rules for their employment are stipulated by the U.S. Department of Labor.
And obviously that's just a floor for you. If you had a particular
Yeah.
work at your ranch or your farm that was particularly gifted in something,
Yeah.
that's a floor. So you of course can make more than
Yeah,
your
correct.
$25 base.
Well, in reality, the fact of the matter is that when somebody gets here, we know, employers know that there's always a flight risk. Somebody could come see a talented individual and try and hire them away from you, at which point in time they would lose their visa status and become illegal. but we want to make sure we keep them because we've invested in them.
Right.
They have talents and abilities and skills that we want.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, we'll pay them enough to keep them happy because we don't want them leaving. We don't want them to leave and
Right.
go back home just because they choose to. And we don't also want them to be recruited away that would jeopardize their legal status by
Right.
some other employer either.
Right.
So we reward above and beyond for those that have those capabilities for sure.
Well, thanks for talking about that. I think there's just a lot of misconceptions,
Yeah.
misunderstandings about the topic in general. I'm glad we're starting the discussion. So let's talk about another issue, and that was there's a House Joint Memorial 9, and this it says the legislature calls on the U.S. Congress to reaffirm Federal Land Policy and Management Act as the primary authority governing federal land management and land exchanges. What is that, and why did the House do this memorial?
Yes, so that's a memorial that I'm very happy that Representative Judy Boyle brought forward. It's a little unfortunate, quite frankly. For example, my family has been here since territorial days.
Wow.
And when we came here, I think probably the governing law was the Homestead Act. And we homesteaded here. We plowed brush under and started working the ground. And over the years, there were all of this continuous cycle of fragmented laws that were passed governing the use of the land, from the Taylor Grazing Act in the 1930s to PREA to now what was known as FLPMA, or was passed in 1976, the Federal Lands Management Policy
And
Act.
that's the one that this addresses.
Right. And the intent of that law was to basically bring all of those succeeding laws together into one policy, unified policy and statute federally that would govern the multiple use of these lands going forward. And so what has happened in recent times is that some judges that aren't satisfied with what that law has said in its precedent for 50 years now, 50 years this year, are trying to circumvent that law and go back to older laws and use those laws again to determine the common law going forward, for example.
And so why would be going back be harmful to Idaho, and why did you guys put your stamp on, like, this is our governing authority?
Well, for example, really enshrined the concept of multiple use into our federal code. And those that aren't satisfied with multiple uses or want to identify or prioritize certain ones over the others, like conservation or maybe dealings with native tribes or otherwise, or maybe want to prioritize wildlife and fish over resource management and use by industries and mining, would probably look to those previous laws to get standing or more clout in their decision making. And so it is, to me, it seems unfortunate that we would have to draw attention to or clarify or ask Congress to simply restate something that they've already done, but yet also has been the law of the land for 50 years now. And all of these land use decisions have been made based on that law, and we're unwinding them.
So this is something that the House has done?
Yeah.
Does that mean you're going to take it to the Senate as well, or is this just the House wanting to say this is the feeling of the House? How does that work?
It would be a resolution. It would go through both chambers. Right now, it's been introduced and it's in the House Resource Committee, but we hope it goes all the way through into Congress.
Perfect. So this is not saying the governor's side. It's not a law. This is like saying this is the will of the legislative body of Idaho. Congress, please take note.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now let's talk about another topic which I feel has just been misunderstood, de-emphasized maybe, and that's the successes we've had at our public schools. Governor Little, one of his major priorities was reading, right? Literacy. And the superintendent of public instruction, Debbie Critchfield, solidly behind public schools and just education in general, and really trying to make a difference. And I think the part that people forget is just how committed the legislature has been to public schools. So you were the chair of the education committee last year. You've been voting on these things your 2 terms, but I want to read a couple of things. I've been looking back. Over the last 10 years, the Idaho legislature has appropriated nearly $1.5 billion of incremental public school funding, so that the 2024-2025 school budget, $2.94 billion versus $1.46 billion in the 2014-2015. Over the last 10 years, the funding in Idaho has increased 84% per student to $9,231 from $5,022 per student. During the last 10 years, the Idaho legislature has committed $170 million to pay for 1.8 million advanced opportunity credits for students in high school. That's that's equivalent to a lot of years in college. And it saved families hundreds of millions of dollars of tuition they didn't have to pay for
Right.
these credits.
Yeah.
In 2024, the legislature passed House Bill 521, which dedicated $125 million in ongoing sales tax revenue to the new school modernization funds facility for bonding, and that raised $1.1 billion for school modernization across the state, and obviously reduced the needs for bonds and levies in locals, so that helps with property taxes, right? 2024 House Bill 521 also increased funding to the school district facility by approximately $75 million by increasing sales tax revenue directed to the school district facility fund from 2.25 to 3.25% of the tax revenue that we levy. In 2023, House Bill 292 distributed approximately $100 million to school districts to prioritize the payment of school bonds, levies, and for needs at the schools. And in 2023, House Bill 24 expanded the Idaho Launch Program, $80 million to fund for degrees and experience in in-demand careers. That is a tremendous amount of dedication. And that's since you've been here. All these bills are 23, 24, 25. So talk about like how you see public education. Sorry for the very long question, by the way.
That's
but
very,
I just people
well
have
said.
to know.
I agree. And when I went before JFAC last year to give my budget request and report, that's how you had to start the conversation, which I did, is that we need to see where we've come from before we can understand really where we're going forward. Governor Little's held true to his promise to work for education ever since he was elected. Coming out of the Great Recession in 2008, we were behind in a lot of things, and we were growing and have continued to grow tremendously. Yet we had this backlog of infrastructure maintenance and transportation, and we had all these growing pains with the growth in our state that needed funded, and so we had to prioritize education in the midst of all of those demands. And that was successfully done and continued to be so. And one thing that's interesting about since I've been here is the fact that we've been in a surplus situation until this year on our revenues. And for the first time in state history, we've taken surplus sales tax funds and directed them toward facilities for schools. That had never been done. That is completely new. Before, as those facilities were the responsibility of property taxpayers, and that's something that's put a huge dent in our needs for facility maintenance and improvement in the state. Is directing the surplus funds back in the form of tax relief to help first pay down bonds and levies and take care of emergency situations like HVAC situations or whatever, or to finance
Fund a new
building.
school.
Or if in the case there isn't a need in that particular district, they can bank it away, save it up. In fact, there's even been suggestions coming forward that maybe we should allow them to borrow against that if they can bank it away and try to do things with it that way as well. We haven't gotten that far yet in the conversation, but that's an idea that's floating around out there.
Now, you've been also last year, you were driving some initiatives on the rural schools because Ada County, obviously very much more dense. That out of that $1.1 billion, almost $200 million was directed towards helping with Ada's school situation. Some of the smaller areas don't get as much money, but have some of obviously the same needs. Talk about what you philosophically want to do to help rural schools even more.
Yeah, so two fronts there. I mean, I compare it to the Costco model. By definition, it costs more to educate kids in a rural setting than it does in an urban setting. It costs more for the buildings, it costs more to fund the units, and then your student population drops down. Then it becomes difficult to fund all the different units for all the different academic criteria that need to be represented in a school. But I compare it back to the Costco model of the fact that we can't just let the lowest cost drive all of the policy. We have to accept the fact that just like we may be able to consolidate our rural grocery store into a Costco setting and gain efficiencies there and lower costs that benefit everybody, but we can't do that with education. We need to have rural small schools to serve our kids' needs. They need to be educated close to home, and this is part of the culture and fabric of our state. And so
those schools can mean more to the community
absolutely.
And other things.
These schools are places where not only do we go learn, but we have funerals at our schools. We have community events that are not related to education.
The plays,
at our
the
schools.
concerts, the games.
It is the epicenter It is the epicenter of those communities and part of our culture. And by definition, it needs to be maintained. And that's as we move more from a unit based funding model to a student based funding model, that's going to be something that I'm going to work to guard, that we still have the ability to maintain those schools in those rural settings and give close to home access for our kids for public education.
Well, we are very blessed because we have a lot of education choices here in Idaho, home schools. We have 90 public charter schools now, which is just amazing. That's happened in the last 20 years. And we obviously have a wonderful public school system. And we have private schools. But, when we talk about some of the investment that we've made, right, there's actually been a return on in our investment.
Yeah.
So I just talked about the 90 public charter schools, but our graduation rate last year was 82.3%, which is a 10-year high. Our reading proficiency is at 71% for K-3, and that was only 65.5% the year before. So it's gone up quite a bit. We talked about those college credits, 1.8 million college credits you're getting from and that fund nobody talks about. That's funded by the state. That $170 million was funded by the state, which allowed that 1.8 million credits to be earned by our students. The Heritage Foundation ranks Idaho, Representative Pickett, as the #1 return on investment in the country. And we've had 40,000 students already go through financial literacy classes. Superintendent of Public Instruction Debbie Critchfield worked on that with Representative Petsky to bring that to reality. And 72% of Idaho's high school students have taken a CTE credit, which ranks Idaho #5 in the U.S. And an August 2025 report by the National Alliance of Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships shows that Idaho ranks #1 in U.S. students who take a career technical class and a dual class credit. So Idaho is 45% of the students do that, which is amazing.
Wow.
And 6.9% of all high schoolers are graduating with an industry-recognized credential.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. The investments that we're making in education, public education, are doing something meaningful. The other thing I want to chat with you about is how important is it, especially when we talked about the special needs in Idaho of all the different industries that we have here, how important it is with these dual credits and these CTE credits and focusing on launch and CTE.
For sure. Yeah. And just to agree with you from what you've said all along the way is that it's so important. And Idaho's done such a great job of making sure that parents have all the tools in their toolkit as far as what their kids' needs are, that they can choose, whether they're in an urban or rural setting, whichever home choice or school choice or CTE, whatever dual credit, whatever they feel like their kids would adapt to the best to be successful. And then in the post-secondary setting, which is what you're referring to, that they have the ability to move right into their career life, whatever that may be. And for example, my son went to a rural school. My youngest son just graduated a couple of years ago, and he applied for a 4-year university. And when he got there, he found out he had 41 credits, even in a rural setting.
Amazing.
And where you would suppose that maybe some of the opportunities were limited, he was able to start college out with 41 credits.
Which is almost 15 classes that he did not have to pay for.
1 full year of college plus.
Yeah, it's amazing. So think about how much that saves
absolutely.
the parent. That's kind of a hidden tax cut. Representative Doug Pickett, we just really enjoy. Remind people he represents Legislative District 27.
Mm-hmm.
And we just thank you for coming on the Idaho House Republicans podcast. And we thank you for all the work you've done. And thank you for your leadership on the Education Committee last year. And you're obviously been promoted by your caucus to the Assistant Majority Leader. And we just bless the work of your hands on that as well. We thank you for joining us on this podcast. And until we see you next time, God bless the great state of Idaho. And thank you again, Representative Doug Pickett.
Appreciate all you do. Thank you.
From timber towns to wheat field roads, different roads, but the same old hope. We bow our heads and we stand up tall, answering the people when due.